Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and thank you for joining us today. My name is Laurine Mojeri. I'm the head of Foreign Investor Relations here at the Ministry of Tourism in Jerusalem, and it is my pleasure to welcome you today at this event called Israel and the UAE Hotel Investment Opportunities, a webinar co-organized by the Israel Ministry of Tourism, HVS, the UAE-Israel Business Council, and Copeland Hospitality. Today's event is really about exploring brand new business opportunities. So we'll try to provide some concrete and useful content from experts in the hotel investment field. And as you will see, today's speakers are really some of the best experts in the world in this field. So who's watching us today? In the audience, we have senior executives from equity funds, hotel chains, banks, but also private investors. Delegates who are watching us are based in the UAE, in Israel, in the US, and in Europe. I hope you will find the next hour and a half interesting, and my hope is that it will prepare the ground for future transactions in the hotel industry between Israel and the UAE. I will soon share my contact details on the chat so that you can contact me for any question related to Israel or to the conference. At the Investment Administration here at the Israel Ministry of Tourism, we assist both Israeli and foreign investors, developers, and owners. We also organize events so that the industry can gather online and hopefully soon offline, including two major international hotel investment conferences in Israel in the last 3 years. So please feel free to reach out, whether you are looking for an opportunity, a local partner, or have questioned about the grants that the ministry provides to hotel developers. So let's start with our first speaker. I'm honored to welcome the Minister of Tourism of the State of Israel, member of the Knesset, Orit Farkash-Hakohen. Minister Farkash-Hakohen, please.
Good afternoon, everybody. It's a great pleasure and an honor to be the one who's opening this important webinar. As the Minister of Tourism, I think it's the perfect time to host you and to introduce you to all the opportunity of investments in the tourism sector in Israel. You know that Israel now is at a turning point, a very positive turning point with regards to the vaccination situation. We are among the world leading countries in vaccination, and Israel economy, leisure, and life and education is going back to normal that we prayed and hoped for over a year. As part of that, we are starting gradually to think about opening the skies, and of course towards we allow Israelis to go to other countries, but also to bring tourists gradually to Israel. As I said more than once, it is governments who signed agreements, but people who are the one who creates peace, who are creating peace. And in my view, there is nothing like tourists and tourism between countries to amplify and implement the true side of acceptance, of cultural sharing, and of friendship. In my conversation that I had with His Excellency El Falassi, the Minister of Tourism of Dubai, and both the Minister of Abu Dhabi, we all agreed on the great economic potential that the new normalization agreements bring to our region, to both our countries. And this should be implemented economically, both in the airline industry, but more or less in the tourism industry. In that perspective of the hospitality segment in Israel, we have a lot to offer. We are now one of the healthiest countries in the world, dealing with a lot of development in the tourism industry. And I'm sure that many of you know that the tourism ministry is for many years supporting financially new projects of building or widening hotels around the countries. In the last 5 years, the Ministry of Tourism has given budgets and grants to developers and the people from the hospitality and the hotel chains industry around the world, and also to Israeli entrepreneurs in the area of tourism, over 1 billion shekels as financial grants and supports in order to encourage them to put an anchor or to strengthen the anchor that they put in the country. And I call upon you to make the most of this meeting today and see how you can use this special time, this time in the world history that is both a challenge, but also has the potential to be a great opportunity to use these grants and to use these subsidies in order to build hotels, to expand the existing hotels, for hotel chains from the Emirates, from other countries. Everybody, we welcome everybody, and it is not only the money. The staff of the ministry is very well trained and committed to helping you and escorting you and helping you in every step of the way of getting the license and the permits and the zoning ruling and everything. And our teams are here to assist you. I hope that today will be a beneficial webinar. Your success is our success. And I hope you will have a very beneficial day with results we are looking for and hoping to have as many of you and as much as we can of new hotels, expanding hotels, because Israel's infrastructure and capacity of guests is lacking the demand. And I think that in that aspect, there is yet another opportunity that lies in this webinar. So thank you, everybody, and have a successful webinar.
Thank you, Minister Farkasha Cohen. I now want to introduce Robin Rossmann, Managing Director at STR, who will give us an update on recent performance of hotels in the UAE and in Israel. Please, Robin.
There you go. I was not being allowed to unmute. So I've unmuted successfully, and I'm just trying to start my video. There we go. Moments of panic temporarily relieved. Let's see if I can get the final hurdle, which is sharing my screen, if we can get that happening from the tech side. It says there, host has disabled screen sharing, so please, if you can enable that in a second.
You can share your screen.
Wonderful. Brilliant. Well, thank you very much for having me here today. It's an amazing event, and I want to just say thank you for having me. Thank you, Russell, for organizing. I do think that there are really not many more exciting destinations from a hotel perspective and from an investment perspective than Israel and the UAE. And I'd like to spend just the next couple of minutes going through some of the reasons for that. I'll start with a bit of a global outlook and then dig into more detail. And the reason I start with a global outlook is it should be no surprise to anybody that the hotel industry has found the ramifications of the COVID outbreak very difficult and very challenging over the last year, as travel has come to a standstill in many places. And I think the one thing I just wanted to start with was showing you this chart, which shows the number of hotels that had to close temporarily through April and May last year, and how so many of those have now reopened around the world. And even though we're into a second and third wave in many countries, hotels have shown their resilience to reopen, to get trading. And whilst conditions are still tough, they are open and trading again. So to give some perspective, last year was really tough. Occupancies ranging from 20% odd to 40% odd at best. But the good news is when we look at the profile of occupancies, we've seen just how quickly they can recover here. You can see China at the top, the first to decline, and then recovering almost back to 2019 levels until a recent wave of cases. And the rest of the world showing some recovery in the summer last year, but because of the resurgence, that declining again. So the question is, where does the UAE and where does Israel sit in the context of that world performance? And I've shown the UAE here with really a remarkable resilience coming through from December last year. You can see one of the top performing regions in the world from an occupancy perspective in the last 3 months. Israel has had to follow some much stricter lockdowns through 2020. And yes, there is the remarkable vaccine success that I'll touch on shortly, but it really is only beginning its recovery cycle right now. And the reason for that is when we look at performance across the world in hotels and countries around the world, what we saw was just how important the proportion of domestic demand was in terms of the ultimate performance of those countries. And you can see Israel in the middle there, a reasonably significant international reliance. So occupancy struggling at around that 25% mark. Now, what you can't see on there at the moment is the UAE, and that is because, as in all things in life, there are always outliers. And so we had to put that on there separately because even though 90% plus of the UAE's demand typically comes from international travel, so far less domestic, it still was one of the strongest performing countries in the world in 2020 because it was able to have some resilience from quarantine demand and then a stronger recovery in the back end of the year with staycations and as travel restrictions were reduced, that international demand starting again. So briefly on the Middle East, I think one of the things that make it so exciting is the innovation that's shown to drive travel demand, whether that be from the hubs that were set up for airlines in the region, to more recently how the policies being taken to drive demand through things like remote working visas. Really is an area where people are really focused on getting people to the destinations. And so that is why we have seen the steady recovery in Middle East room nights sold in recent months. Stepping back to where we are now on the 28th of March and looking at a global leaderboard, you can see that the UAE up there pretty much at the top at a 60% occupancy. Israel still recovering at 20%, but I wouldn't be too worried about that, and I'll explain why in a second. So on to Israel and the UAE and focusing on that UAE performance. I think one of the things that does just demonstrate how attractive it is as a destination is, you know, even in 2020, which was a tough year for the world as a whole, when you look around the sub-markets of the UAE, you can see all of them achieving occupancies, pretty resilient occupancies of 40 to above 60%. And as we go into this year, so far, those occupancies ranging more from 50 to 70%. So remarkable resilience as a destination in what is the toughest of times for the global hotel industry. Just to show you how important some of those policies were, here you can see occupancies in Dubai in 2020 in teal compared to 2019, and how when the travel corridors were opened up, even though so much of the demand is typically reliant on international, there's this huge pent-up demand around the world, particularly in the Northern Hemisphere, and many markets, when they got the opportunity to travel to Dubai, even if they had to take a test, they were willing to do it. And we saw occupancies bounce back up to pre-pandemic levels pretty quickly around December, January. And it wasn't done by hoteliers offering massive discounts. You can see here that average rates, sorry, there's an error on the legend there, average rates were pretty much back at pre-pandemic levels. Now, they've drifted away in recent months for the reasons that we know why and the problems in the source markets. But what this does show us is when this virus is under control, we can expect that to bounce back quickly. And in places like Abu Dhabi here, you can see that year-on-year occupancies are now pretty much back and in some cases exceeding 20 pre-pandemic levels. What about Israel? Well, Israel has had a more challenging time recently, but I do think it's important we step back and show the performance of the industry over the last decade. And you can see here, indexed to 2008, RevPAR has grown significantly and is now 50% up to the end of 2019, was 50% higher than it was in 2008. And that just shows the strong ongoing growth and demand and performance in the market, and it's vitally important to support investments. You can see that recent spike at the beginning of 2018, and you might ask yourself, what's that got to do with? Well, it's obvious that it's the Eurovision concert that has surged demand in 2019 in Israel. Clearly it is not. That's obviously had a part to play, but I think it speaks to really what we saw, which is double-digit increases in international visitor arrivals from 2017 to 2019. And really just showing the appeal of Israel, not just for religious tourism, but also as a leisure break destination. And one of the things that really helped drive that was extending stays into the weekend and increasing occupancies to the levels that we saw, which was over 70% for the country as a whole. So really strong, robust year-round and week-round occupancies. And that stretched across Tel Aviv, Eilat, and the regional regions of Israel. I'll end off with this, which is probably the most important metric we're all looking at these days. And it's no longer about getting to 100%, it's about getting to 200%, which is everybody having 2 doses of the vaccine. And Israel, obviously, amazingly, has led the world now at 110% of the population having vaccines, or 110% administered. And whilst we've not yet seen that cause a massive recovery in Tel Aviv, we've seen that huge recoveries in the leisure markets in Eilat and the regional markets, where occupancies have gone from 5% to 50% in a matter of weeks. And so as I think we look towards the rest of this year and really the long-term opportunities, we have to remember that hotels are a long-term investment. They are real estate that lasts 50 plus years. And when I think of what makes it most important when making investment decisions around that, it is understanding the long-term demand prospects for destinations. And for the reasons I've just highlighted in this presentation, I think both Israel and the UAE offer loads of that long-term potential and appeal. And on that, I will hand back to Russell and the panel.
Thank you, Robin. The next session is an exciting interview by Ronit Copeland, Managing Director at Copeland Hospitality. Ronit, please.
Thank you, Lauren. First of all, on a personal note, it's a delight, it's a pleasure to have worked with Russell and Lauren on this event, and of course later on with Fleur, who became a bridge also to the other part of this world, and that's the UAE. We're going to bring into camera, if that's okay, Fleur, Hassan, if you can get on camera, and Kamal, my distinguished guest speaker and interviewees. So as we get them together, we'll make sure that Fleur also gets on. And the 3 of us are going to have a wonderful conversation and take over really from what the Minister of Tourism said, and also Robin. And I think one of the most important statements was the long-term view, where we started and have progressed tremendously on the Avram Accords. And now we're looking into really how to see it also with the short term getting on a plane, each one of us, and visiting each other and seeing finally face to face, like it was today, yesterday and today, big conference in Dubai, and later on within the hospitality and the hotel sector, and not just the cyber. So I'm going to introduce my guests. Those who don't know me, before I do that, I'm Ronit Copeland. Had my very veteran hotelier, many years in the business. And straight away after the Avram Accords, after having my firm already for over a decade, started to be extremely involved with the relations and the networking when it comes to Dubai and Abu Dhabi, and the incredible opportunities that we have as Israelis to bridge and to really collaborate. And there's really nothing is for granted these days, and I think we all appreciate how much potential there is. So my guest, so happy to have you with us. We have Mr. Kamal Naamani, Managing Director, Hospitality and Leisure for Al Haftur Group. Thank you so much, Kamal, for being with us. It's a real pleasure. And we have Fleur Hassan Nahum, who is, this is a long one, who is managing deputy, of course, mayor of Jerusalem with the foreign relations and economic relations and tourism, of course, and also co-founder of the UAE-Israel Business Council. Very busy, both of you, so we appreciate your time in being with us. And right on our first question, please go ahead and feel free to expand a little bit of what you do, and what is your position like, and your organization, of course. So, and really in the spirit of everything that's going on, and the fact that the trade numbers between the UAE and Israel have reached over 1 billion dirhams as of March 2021, massive changes are happening between Israel and the Gulf nations, relationship in so many levels as we speak, and honestly, just a true new era of trade relations, and exciting business councils that we're looking at. Later on, we'll discuss also funds. And what I wanted to ask you, and I'll start with Kamal, in what concrete ways can your region contribute to these impressive beginnings of the economic initiatives? In what ways have your organization already been collaborating with others, in your case with Israeli investors, within the tourism and also the hotel? If you could be a little bit more, giving examples about the hotel sector, that would be great. And I will put in something else, and that's the issue of equity within the hotel investments. Who do you think will be more comfortable and move forward faster in terms of putting equity in the other friends, neighbors, countries? Kamal, go ahead, and then Fleur will be able to answer also.
Take a quick minute just to, I'm the managing director, as Ronit mentioned. Haftur Group, we have interest in many industries, in many businesses. Hospitality is obviously one of them. We have interest in real estate. We have interest in education. We have interest, a huge interest in automotives, and many other side things as well. Now, I think I can put my money on it that probably our chairman, Salah Al-Haftur, who probably was the most active person prior to the normalization of the relationship, that he probably, or most likely, will make the first move to be in Israel, okay, with an investment. We see this as a huge opportunity, obviously. Right from the minute, hands were shaken and what have you, and the relationship started and the skies opened up, we saw huge interest and huge demand, obviously, on both sides, I take it. Unfortunately, this dropped very quickly because of the lockdowns and the issue, but now we're starting to see again, things moving up in the right direction. So we do see an opportunity for us to invest. We see also, obviously, opportunities, investment from the other side. Now, for us, this is a little bit too early because a lot of things we need to look at, a lot of things we need to consider. But knowing how we move in our organization, we look for opportunities, we look for the right the right investment, the right property in terms of hotels, and then we make very quick move on it. Okay, one thing about us that we're known worldwide is that we waste no time. Where the opportunities are, we jump at them. So right now, actually, we are in the process. We're in discussions, on some investment opportunities.
So we are really hiring up those expectations, and we're definitely looking forward. I've definitely been a witness of what you're saying is absolutely true. Fleur, do you want to address the question?
Yes, before we start, I just want to give a lot of respect to Khalaf Al-Abtour, the chairman of the Al-Abtour Group, who I know very well. Apart from being a very, very nice man, he's for 10 years been saying, if not longer, the UAE has to normalize with Israel, that Israel is an incredible investment partner, potential partner for Israel. And so I'm very pleased to be on this panel with Mr. Kamal Naamani, who of course represents this wonderful family. And so look, at the end of the day, I agree with what Kamal is saying. We've been running with like anchors on our feet because of Corona, which is of course the industry which has devastated the most, has been the tourism industry. From our own Jerusalem perspective, Jerusalem is the largest tourism city in Israel. 80% of our tourism is foreign tourism, and 20 to 30% of our city income comes through tourism. And of course, you can't separate tourism and small businesses because so many small businesses serve the masses of tourism that come every year. In Jerusalem, for a while now, we've been offering planning, development incentives to build hotels because we lack hotels. So when I met Mr. Al-Abtour, I said to him, please come and build a hotel in Jerusalem. So I'm hoping that maybe this will happen very soon. And so what we're finding now, that with all this difficulty, this is the time to kind of reflect and to plan, because I truly believe that with all the difficulty that we've suffered in the last year, the next 2 years are going to be boost years for the vaccinated countries, for the countries who've managed to control Corona. Now, I don't know what international travel is going to look like, what you're going to need to come into the UAE, or I know what it is. I'm in Dubai right now.
You're speaking to us from Dubai right now.
I'm speaking. Yeah, I came for 2 conferences, so I'm very pleased to be speaking in Dubai. And I know what works in terms of international travel, but I do think that in the next year and a half, the countries that have managed to control and the countries that managed to get to herd immunity through the vaccinations will be the countries that there will be a boost in tourism, because nobody will want to travel to the countries that are still not getting out of it. And so
and we're actually both doing well.
Exactly.
With that. And then
fact,
that's one other
absolutely.
common factor that we have together.
We are the 2 top countries for vaccination. And what I'm calling for right now, and this is one of the reasons why I'm here, is a green corridor between Israel and the Gulf countries, the Abraham Accord countries, of course, UAE and Bahrain, who are also on their way to achieving herd immunity. And this provides us with a head start also in hotel investment. It gives us a head start to the rest of the world. Plus, it gives us a little bit of breathing space, because with tourism, you never get to plan so much. It's one of those industries.
And we go back to the long term and how important.
Exactly. And we can really plan and think, okay, what's happening in the next 10 years? What does a post-COVID world look like? And how are we going to be ahead of the curve in terms of, whatever it is that we need to do to keep our countries COVID clean, or any other virus that may come in the future? We really don't know what can happen in the future. But if we together with the UAE can write the best practice manual from our common experiences on what the post-COVID tourist world will look like, then we can really lead that charge. And that, with all the difficulty and the misery of the last year, is kind of exciting prospect at the moment.
And to that point, wonderful point. Also, Kamal spoke about a little bit, and you, and we are, as we speak, we are writing the playbook. These two countries are truly together, already collaborating and writing a really, really different playbook. Let me ask you another question. Again, I'll start with Kamal, and Fleur, feel comfortable to jump in right after Kamal. To what extent do you feel it is realistic to see the establishment of a substantial cross-border investment fund that will support business initiatives specifically in the hotel sector? Do you see government and private institutions working together like we've seen in other countries? What advantages do you consider the UAE and Israel investors have over those other countries in terms of the type and size of investments? My personal impression so far, and it's not surprising, is that there is a demand from the UAE on large scale investments, big stuff. And the question is that the only thing that there's interest in, and yes or no, and why? And again, are we supposed to be working right now on doing a mutual fund together? That's a pun, but to really work together on a very, very large fund to be able to get those investments going a little bit faster.
Look, on the cooperation between the two, obviously an investor, and then again, I know how we work in the UAE here. For an investor, you don't just take the money and go in and open a hotel. There has to be the cooperation between the two. As Fleur said, I think the support and that the government will provide to investment will make a big difference, obviously, or huge influence on how big we go, or if we go, or if we don't go. So that has to be there. That's a given, obviously. And again, we're interested in going in, taking a look, and see the potential. Now, we've met a lot of travel agents, and we met a lot of destination management and what have you. We haven't gone to Israel yet, but we see the need for, as Fleur said, again, big hotels similar to what we have here in the UAE, in Dubai. Again, seeing some of the the Israeli tourists coming in here, being wowed by this. And they said to us, we have nothing like this back home, right? This is what we see as an opportunity, really, for us to go in. But yes, there has to be we have to work hand in hand with the government on both sides, obviously, to make this happen. Investment, obviously, it's going to take guts, for either side, okay, to who's going to be the first. But as I said, I put our money on it that most likely we will be the first to make that initial step into.
This is being recorded, Kamal, so we're happy that you say that. All right, you're more than welcome. Okay, Fleur, do you want to give your thoughts on that, your insights on that?
Yeah, look, we can't forget that we only signed the agreement, the normalization agreements, in September. And even though there were many tens of companies, Israeli companies, working here in the UAE, and a kind of a very under the radar normalization for a number of years now, I think that the Israelis have to learn a little bit of patience. And I think that we are getting to know each other. We're getting to know the markets. We're also learning who's serious, who's got strategy, who's got vision. And so I wouldn't run into talking about who's building hotels where, but my connections, of course, for example, the Dan Group. The Dan Group's already been approached by local companies here in Dubai, when I say here, in the UAE, to consider opening a hotel, to consider all sorts of collaborations. I think the future is very bright, but I think that between the COVID, recession, the fact that property prices in the UAE have gone up and down, the fact that property prices in Israel are very high, even through this crisis. And of course, in Jerusalem, we have what almost no other city has, which is incredible government financial incentives to come and build hotels. I think we just need to take a breath before anybody starts running into investing anywhere. I think that the most likely scenario at the moment are joint ventures in travel, joint ventures in tour companies, joint ventures in conferences. For example, the expo starting in October, I think 6 months, I think is a fantastic opportunity to really have these very high level discussions in the cusp of the new post-corona tourism era. And any big hotel group you will talk to, of course, is already in talks with the other side, with other hotel groups, but I don't envision anybody signing anything in the next few months. I'm being completely honest. I think we need to.
I actually think there will be some interesting deals going on in the next 2 months, but
Okay.
I do get your advice on the fact of step by step, let's work together and get to know each other and so forth. I do have another last question. We're running out of time and we have just like 1 more minute, but I do want to ask Kamal and also Fleur, you gave at least one advice in terms of patience, but if you had to give just one sentence, one word to the other side, Kamal to the Israeli investors and Fleur to the UAE investors, what would be the one piece of advice that very, 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 very shortly you could say to them, guys, please note this. This is my biggest advice. Go ahead, Kamal.
Am I going
The
first?
good one.
I agree with Fleur and the comments she made. Due diligence, okay. Evaluate each step. I mean, it's natural, it's normal, but that's really the best advice I can give. Again, it is still very early, I'm in agreement, but there are a lot of opportunities. You could miss it very easily as well, right? So you have to do your due diligence. You have to look, at all these opportunities and take it as we do, one step at a time.
Fleur?
I want to say, listen, let's just look at the numbers for a second, okay? So there've been 130,000 Israelis going to the UAE since the signing of the Abraham Accords. During Corona, during 2 lockdowns in Israel. And so the potential is enormous. I'm, of course, very excited by the potential on the other side of Emiratis and in general Gulf tourists having a new destination. Jerusalem, of course, my city, with its historic sites, with its Muslim history and Jewish history and Roman and Ottoman and everything else, and very much also the wellness part of the Israel tourism industry, like the Dead Sea, and the nature side of Israel, like the north of Israel. And so there's reasons to be very, very optimistic about the market. The market is there and will only grow. And so this is a matter of time. I agree with Kamal. We have to do due diligence. We have to look into how to develop this in the smartest way. But the future is very bright, because what we see now is that what we are in the cusp of is regional tourism, the way that European countries jump to each other for weekends. This is what we're going to be seeing. This is very exciting. And so the hotel investment is only 2 clicks behind people booking a flight to go.
I agree.
Or to come back.
Absolutely. And to the point of due diligence, which of course I absolutely agree, the importance of getting local advice and each side getting, the right people locally on the ground to be able to help out and really get the real numbers and really give the best advice possible. I want to thank you, Kamal Namani, the head of hospitality and leisure in Al Habtoor, and to Fleur Hassan Nahum, Thank you, really. It's been a pleasure, Fleur, also to get to know you really in the last
Thank
couple of
you.
months working on this. You've been also co-host with us, bridging between the two countries. So thank you for that. And
Thank
I'm
you.
going to hand over for the next very exciting panel discussion, which we have very impressive lineup, to Russell Kett. Russell Kett doesn't need any introduction. Everyone knows who he is. I call him the king of hotel valuations, investments, development, the whole thing. So Russell, take over. Good luck. You have a great panel.
Thank you so much, Ronit. I hope that my appearance on screen this morning, this afternoon, whichever country you're joining us from, is clear. I am so honored to be moderating this panel, which really gets to the heart of the webinar's subject. Cross-border hotel investment in the UAE and Israel. And I'm delighted to welcome 5 gentlemen whose experience is already well known to so many of you. They represent all facets of the hotel sector from an investor's, developers, and operators perspective, and with a mix of knowledge about the sector in both the UAE and Israel. And so I invite Jonathan Fallick of JF Capital, David Fatal of Fatal Hotels, Harold Hovland of Radisson Hotels, Mark Maurice of the Amina Group, and Henry Tyke of Classic Hotels to join us on screen, on camera, on microphone. As they do so, you'll recall that we were to be joined by Gerald Lawless, a doyen of the hotel sector in the Middle East, who is now an ambassador to the World Travel and Tourism Council and still based in Dubai. He's now recuperating following an unexpected but successful surgery last week. And I know you will all join with me in wishing him a speedy and complete recovery. And we're very sorry that he's not able to join us today. Ladies and gentlemen of the audience, the distinguished audience that we have out there, I note, first of all, Harold, if you can join us, that would be great. But this session is for you. I've got a lot of questions that I'm prepared to ask our distinguished panelists, but I'm sure that there are some in our audience who would also like to pose questions. And if you could please use the chat function and send your questions to me via the chat function, I'll do what I can to include them in our session. So to kick us off, I want to allow each panelist to spend no more than 1 minute summarizing their thoughts on the opportunities for cross-border investment in hotels from their own company's perspective, but first to introduce themselves. So gentlemen, you have 1 minute. Who are you? Where are you based? What is your company's main goal concerning cross-border hotel investment between the UAE and Israel? Let's go in some sort of alphabetical order. Jonathan, please kick us off.
Thank you, Russell, and thank you for having me. That's a lot to answer in 60 seconds, so I'll go very fast. I'm Jonathan Fallick, founder of JF Capital Advisors. I'm based in New York City. I'm in Israel many times a year, actively work on projects throughout Israel. Very excited to be thinking about cross-border investment. And one of the things that I think is most interesting for this discussion is in Israel, there is an existing large Arabic-speaking population, large English-speaking population. There's infrastructure in both Arabic and English. And similarly, thinking through the UAE, there's a very young population of well-educated citizens that are active and frequent travelers and with similar characteristics in terms of English infrastructure, Arabic infrastructure. So I think the ingredients and tools are there for cross-border dialogue, and as you heard in the previous talk, leading to increased dialogue and to investment. I think it's inevitable.
Thanks, Jonathan. And for the benefit of those who are watching us, Jonathan is talking to you at 5:20 in the morning, his time. He's in Portland, Oregon for his sins on business, I hasten to add. So thank you for getting up so early. David Fatal, lovely to have you with us. And in 1 minute, and I should say, for those of you who follow the Just a Minute radio program without hesitation, repetition, or deviation of any kind. So please answer the question in 60 seconds. Thank you. You need to unmute yourself, I'm afraid. There you go.
Hi, I'm David Fatal. I'm based in Tel Aviv. We are a public company in the Israeli Stock Exchange. We own and manage 220 hotels, about 42,000 hotel rooms. We're active in 20 countries in Europe and Israel. We are the largest hotel company in Israel. We have about 45 hotels here in Israel, resorts and city hotels. The biggest country which we are doing business is Germany with 70 hotels, then the UK and Ireland with about 50 hotels, Israel, the Netherlands, Spain, Italy, Central and Western Europe. We are looking for opportunity in the UAE, and we would love to manage, own, or lease a hotel in Dubai first, or any other part of the UAE, and we actually appointed someone to check for that. I agree that it will take some time, but the potential is huge, as have been said earlier, and we want to be part of it.
Thank you, David. And you know, the only way you can be part of it is by making an effort to be part of it. It's a bit like winning the lottery. You have to buy a ticket first. There's a lot of help you can get from the Lord above, but unless you buy a ticket, you don't get to win the lottery. Arild Hovland, another doyen of the hotel industry. Great to have you with us from Radisson Hotels. Arild, your brief answer to my first question.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm Arild Hovland from the Radisson Hotel Group. A group which has 1,500 hotels in operation and which are present in 120 countries. In the Emirates, we have 23 hotels, and we have been working successfully there for a number of years. In Israel, however, we have tried hard, but we have not been successful. And we are extremely interested in particularly Tel Aviv, where we would like to have a hotel. Both areas of market have a huge potential for inbound as well as outbound travel. And it's an area where we will be active in the future, and we really hope to develop further. So we are looking forward to the success of the cooperation between the Emirates and Israel, and that this will open up a new and successful market, which is already attractive to a large part of the world.
Lovely. Thank you so much. Moving on swiftly, again in alphabetical order, Mark Maurice, the Amina Group. Great to have you with us. We can see that you're joining us from the Emirates, from Dubai. And please give me your 60 seconds response.
Thank you, Russell. So I chair the board of the Amira Group Family Office, of which many of our players are deeply invested in the hotel sector globally and in the F&B sector. And really listening to the eminent words of Fleur and the minister and to Kamal, the idea of take a breath and due diligence appears to be probably the most important one which comes across here. And within the region where I've been for 15 years, the key trick is plan to succeed and you will succeed. To understand here and both in Israel, the consistent changing of regulations, laws, processes, and procedures needs very careful, eminent planning before you step into the right direction. And what I'd also want to mention as well, Russell, and to hear is that the opportunity is not just for the UAE. We need to take a much broader picture and ascertain the opportunity is for the GCC. We're now talking here about moving forward in the future on a pan-governmental level into Saudi Arabia, Oman, Qatar, the other areas where populous numbers, wealth is much greater than that of the UAE in terms of populace, in terms of individuals. And so expand our horizons now to think about what will come in our long-term strategic planning in the same way as Dubai has always run its policies as supply-led demand, not demand-led supply. And this is the key emphasis that I would like to get across to start with.
Wonderful, thank you. Henry, to wrap up this part of our session.
Thank you, Russell. I'm Henry Teich. We are a private company specializing in the hotel development in Israel. We built close to 2,000 hotel rooms from the ground up at the Dead Sea, Jerusalem, and in Tel Aviv, which we either operate independently or are managed by international brands, such as Intercontinental in Tel Aviv, for example. We plan to open a newly built 250-room Kempinski branded hotel on the beachfront in Tel Aviv later this year. Recently, we started a new development of an additional 600-room hotel in Tel Aviv, which will be dual branded as a Courier and an LXR. The Abraham Accords are really a dream come true in our lifetime. It suddenly opened up new mutual tourism opportunities and will bring investors in all fields and industries closer together. We are based in Tel Aviv, and we plan to explore possibilities and feasibilities and do our due diligence of developing in the UAE.
Wonderful.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. And gentlemen, if we can now put a line under that particular part of our session, those are the adverts over. All the commercials are now done. Your expertise is really what I want to get to the heart of. I've got a two-part question, as you might expect. So I want to focus initially on what you consider to be the main opportunities for more cross-border hotel investment between the UAE and Israel. Okay, so let's focus first on the opportunities, and then we'll come to the main challenges. But first, the opportunities, and I'd like you, please just focus on one key opportunity as you see it. And I'm going to go in a different order. If I may, I'm going to start with David Fatal. And please, David, what do you consider one of the main opportunities to be?
I think one of the main opportunities is to raise a flag of an international brand that know the Israeli market. So for us, it will be great if we can do a hotel or take over a hotel or whatever in the UAE. This is opportunity which we think will be great. We have a lot of people from the Gulf area staying in our hotel, mainly in Germany, in the UK. A lot of them are coming through the summer for a long period with families. So on the other hand, they, the Tel Aviv area and Jerusalem is lovely cities as well. And the weather is warm, but not as warm as in the Gulf in July and August. So when they look for a cooler city, when they go out to Germany or the UK, they can also put a mark on Jerusalem or Tel Aviv or other parts of Israel. So and then if you have a hotel that have a presence in the Gulf or in Dubai or whatever, and they know of this hotel, then they will be happy to stay at the same chain in the Tel Aviv area. So I think it's a really, really big opportunity for us in this very, very special moment for Israel, having this normalization with the UAE.
Great. It's nice to hear the word cool when applied to Tel Aviv, meaning something other than the fact that it's a really hip place to go and visit. Ariel, from your perspective, what is one of the main opportunities?
Well, I believe for us, what is important is to get a presence in Israel. And as the first destination, Tel Aviv is the most attractive area. Now, as you know, the Emirates and Israel has different models from a point of view of an operator. In Israel, it's predominantly leases, and in the Emirates, it's mainly management, franchise, and so on. And what I hope to be able for us is that we will find a partner in Tel Aviv where we can provide a lease to facilitate the financing, of course, and that we can kick off with that as the first property in Israel.
That's good to know. Actually, talking about leases, Henry, you've managed to break the mold of Israeli hotel owners by working with hotel brands, using management contracts as well. If in the course of answering the question you want to pick up on that point, please don't hesitate to do so. But I'm very keen for you to tell us what you feel one of the main opportunities for more cross-border hotel investment between the two countries is going to be.
I just heard Mr. Kamal Naaman from Al Habtoor, and if he was thinking about doing it quickly, the quickest way would be a purchase of an existing hotel. That obviously will, if they have the wherewithal and the equity and so on, but the prices in Israel are quite high. They start probably with a 3-star hotel about $200,000 to over $700,000 and more per room. So that would be a challenge on the return on the investment that you have to take into account. But that would be the quickest way, but it's not easy to find an appropriate property. The other way would be really one of leasing, and this happens quite, but it's also infrequent. The management, I can just say, I see my friend David Fatal managed a hotel of ours at the Dead Sea for 10 years, did a great job. And that can be done from one day to the other. So if they come to the right terms and be as flexible as David is, then they will be able to receive a property. But I would just say this is a challenge to Mr. Hovland, Mr. Ariel Hovland from Radisson, because the hotels are here. It's a matter of trying to get the owners to see the way that you would like to see. And they don't like to part for many years with their property. They like to be involved. It takes a long time. I'll come to this later. I don't know what the questions will be, but in terms of time that it takes to market, time that it takes to develop a hotel, is such a long time that you don't want to be afterwards obligated with a management contract that tells you do this and do this and fees and fees and fees. So that makes a bit reluctancy. The other thing would be that you can do a conversion, which happens from time to time also, from an office building or an apartment building to a hotel. And then there's the most challenging one would be a new construction. New construction is really not for somebody who's coming in from the outside without a joint venture, without a local partner, because it's very, very cumbersome and it takes a very long time. Red tape is long. It varies between the cities. Tel Aviv is extremely difficult. In Jerusalem and in the periphery, it's easier, but you have to take this into account, and the time to market is so long that it's a big challenge to do something at reasonable costs. I won't go into this at the moment, but there's also the costs involved that you have to take into account: the cost of land, the cost of construction, and the main thing is time to market. So if you have the equity and you can buy a property, then try to do that if you want to get involved very fast.
Thanks, Henry. Mark, you're nodding intently as Henry's speaking. From your perspective, would a local partner be as important in the UAE as Henry is saying it is for those that are wanting to come in to invest in Israel?
I mean, my view based on what we've done here over the past 15 years and with the groups is that unless you have a Khaliji or a GCC local partner, your ability to penetrate the market is pretty much zero. As with everything, without a successful individual who's on the ground over here, mostly at a high level, someone who's a doer, who has a sufficient team behind him, you will undoubtedly fail. So to try and do it alone is simply not a wise move and not a wise approach. It is, however, the approach that a lot of Israelis in other areas have tried to do themselves, and they found that they've hit a sticky wicket, as one would say in English, because it's simply not possible to go and do. From an opportunity angle, I do see something quite unique over here. The paradigm shift really in Israeli local tourism, given the fact you have increasing costs. On the other side, the massive reduction in costs in the UAE, your ability for individuals to travel now to explore a local market, which will be undoubtedly cheaper than your local market, means, of course, that together with the increasing level of the Jewish community, the ability of kosher food, the increasing ability for individuals to live here, it means on the other side, Israel and Israeli hotels and Israeli groups need to step up their game plan for a very simple reason. When you look at your GCC individuals who come across to visit, their normal routing would either be from where they live here in the GCC to the Dorchester in London, then across to Mykonos or to somewhere else. Their expectations are at an exceptionally high level. And I think this expectation can help fuel the increase in the ability of the service level of what's happening with the Israeli hotels. And I touch on service because infrastructure is one thing. And as Russell, you and I had alluded to yesterday very briefly on our private chat, service is really the key component that drives what the GCC market expects. It's a demand-driven economy, consumption-based, 24 hours a day, you can get whatever you want, however you want. And to be able to allow successful tourism from the GCC to Israel, they want to see this as well. And I think the ability for both sides to learn from this experience will benefit greatly what's happening in Israel, in the same way as the Israeli groups will be able to assist the Khaliji groups to understand what they need to do to counter and to deal with the Israeli tourists, which again is a unique bunch of individuals. And I use bunch in a very unique phrase over here, because it is a different mentality. It is a different mindset. And coming back to what I mentioned before, the joint venture philosophy is the only way with a meeting of minds at a principal level to allow this to succeed.
Great, thanks, Jonathan. If you can bring up this part of the conversation to a conclusion. We're talking about the main opportunities, but in your answer, perhaps you'd like to pick up on the point that has been mentioned already about the difficulty for some Israeli banks in particular to accept management contracts as a way forward, and the preference for leases and so forth. If that is something that you can work into your answer, that might be helpful as well, please.
We're happy to. And it's a trend that has evolved over time. What we saw in the United States, which is probably the most developed hotel market broadly in the world, leases were common 30, 35 years ago. And then as the brands created more scope and more power, they said, we have the ability to bring our reservation system, we have the ability to bring our loyal customers, our standardization, but it is much better for our own investors and shareholders, right, of the large branded companies to be asset light and control very little real estate from an ownership perspective and to get out of the leasing business. So we've seen the evolution here. We're starting to see it elsewhere in the world. And basically what happens is it's almost all driven by the capital markets. It's driven by the banks and the ability to lend. So as Henry further develops his model, and as banks, look at someone like David, who has tremendous expertise in a tremendous management company, and they say, well, okay, here's what the pro forma financial statements will look like under a management deal, and there's a well-capitalized existing owner, they'll start to make those loans, and investors will start to do it. The lease structure is very interesting because it converts a hotel operating business, which is an intense operational business sitting on a piece of real estate. The lease converts it into something that more closely resembles an office investment or some other commercial real estate, when the underlying business is the furthest thing from an office building that has 10-year leases. It's a daily operating business sitting on a piece of real estate. And from an ownership perspective, if you can control both sides of it and have an excellent operator, whether branded or independent, the capital markets will follow. So it takes some education and it takes more people doing it. But I will tell you, if you don't have a meaningful amount of equity invested in the deal and you don't have a real track record, if you go to one of the major banks, whether it's in Tel Aviv or in Dubai, and say, I'm going to start my own management company, I've read some books and articles on how to do it. They're going to politely, give you a coffee or a tea and, then escort you to the door. So it's really about having the right professionals. And I can't, I know it was said so clearly by my co-panelists, to try and break into a different country and different market without local partners and local people on the ground who are enmeshed in the culture and have the relationships is almost impossible to succeed. It doesn't mean you can't export different concepts, but so much of Middle Eastern culture for generations and centuries is built on trust and knowing people and long-term relationships. You don't just it's not such a transactional approach to it. Here's the check, here's this, you do this. It's how do we create the joint culture? How do we trust each other? How do we make each other better?
Sounds great. I appreciate that was our glass half full moment. Just for a moment, I want you all to be, a little bit more cautious and say to me, give me one example each. What are the main challenges for foreign investors to overcome? Let's repeat anything that we've said. Let's find some new challenges between us. What to you, Ariel, why don't you kick us off on this point? What are the main challenges that a foreign investor looking either at the UAE or at Israel, you feel is likely to need to overcome?
Well, I think the most obvious is the political situation. At the moment, things are moving very nicely, and hopefully it will be very successful. But it is a region which has a number of problems. So I would think that would be a concern for many foreign investors who has limited knowledge to the market. And again, the local participation from a local partner obviously is crucial, and you would not dare to venture into the market otherwise.
Okay. How about yourself, Mark? What would your feeling about the main challenges? Which one would you focus on?
For me, there are really one unique challenge over here, which is any form of bilateral investment in both the Israelis coming across one way or the other way here needs to understand two key factors. To succeed in either jurisdiction, you've either got to be unique or niche. Consumers are always willing to pay a higher price for a premium product. Full stop. It's always been a law of economics. Or alternatively, you have to be cheaper than your competition. So you have to understand that you have to choose one of these factors, and especially if you're coming into the GCC area, GCC region, the idea of uniqueness, the idea of something boutique, the idea of something different is critical, because otherwise you're in competition with Jumeirah, with Marriott, with Al Habtoor, with Rotana, with Email, with Damak, some of the major world players in top-class hotels, top-class residential apartments, service apartments. And so the uniqueness and differentiation is critical. Or you go for the other side, which is you are cheaper and you are still retaining your quality and delivering high level of service.
Okay, great, thank you. Henry, from your perspective.
I think it depends who it is. If it's a management company, then it's a matter of convincing the owner with the terms that he's getting for the management company to come in is not difficult at all. They will know how they work in many countries around the world, so they will adjust. I agreed with what Ariel said, that from time to time we do have challenges. Every 4 or 5 years, and then it's not so good for about a year or a year and a half, but things are coming back. And we saw beforehand that the statistics show that there are increases in demand. The demand helps everybody because, like we had the last 3 years, we had record number of incoming tourists, went up to now 4.5 million, but it's still nothing. It should be much closer to Dubai. They have 17 million tourists a year. So we should be in those kind of numbers. That just shows that there's a lot of demand. And we said it beforehand, you cannot build something here without the local partner. So don't even try to do development. That would be completely, you wouldn't succeed at all. The only thing is if you buy something and you have a good administrator and you're willing to take a low capital at the beginning, then you can succeed over a period of time.
Okay, Jonathan, from your perspective, main challenge.
So one of the main challenges in thinking through investment is everyone making an investment needs to consider not only how profitable will it be, but how do they exit? How do they exit that investment? And you know, in Israel, there is not an existing exit market in the publicly traded world. So in the States and Europe, there are publicly traded schemes, there are real estate investment trusts, there are investment funds that are natural buyers of completed hotels, of well-performing hotels, of repositioning hotels, and that market has not yet evolved in Israel. So with more ability to sell well-performing hotels, there will be more developers building hotels, and that's across the luxury, upper upscale, and budget economy sectors.
Thank you so much. David, if you would please wrap up this section of our questions, the main challenge from your perspective.
Okay, I mean, for those people who come to Israel, there's a big challenge for them because the regulation and bureaucracy here takes so much time to build hotels, as Henry said, and know very well what's going on here. I mean, I don't think there is too many countries like that in terms of regulation stuff. For us, the main challenge will be to find something that we can operate, either just operating it or investing in it or buying it or lease it. And as Mark said, to find the right partner in this area that could help us penetrate the market. And, you know, for us, we would love to do one hotel and then the second and the third, like we did in different cities throughout Europe. So it's a big challenge for us.
Wonderful. I'm very conscious that we're getting towards the end of the time we have together. And while you all briefly answer my next question, I'm going to try and restore you all on my screen, which will hopefully mean that you're restored on everybody else's screen. So let's focus, if we can, please. What key tax or other incentives are available for Israeli companies to invest in the UAE, or for UAE investors to invest in Israeli hotels? So tax and other finance investors, investment incentives, any particular issues that you foresee there, but just focus on one. And as you're up on my screen now, David, Henry, please kick us off with an answer to this question.
In general, except for Tel Aviv and Herzliya, you do have cash grants and you do have tax benefits. That means in Jerusalem and at the Dead Sea and Eilat, you can get those kind of additional benefits. But in Tel Aviv, for example, the prices are very, very high just for land alone. So very often you have a mixed-use property where you can build an apartment, and with the profits of the apartments you can build a hotel. So this is the idea, is that this is supposed to support the building of hotels, but a developer of real estate does not want to do this. He wants to take out the profits from the apartments. He doesn't want to invest it back right into the hotel. And then the only thing you get after the big involvement, which takes you maybe 4, 5, 6, or 10 years, you know, you have to get, just to get your license to build, you have to get over 150 permits in Tel Aviv alone, which takes a time of 3 or 4 years. This will be, I think, this is the most difficult aspect of the whole thing in terms of investing here in Tel Aviv in a hotel if you don't purchase it outright. If you want to build one, the time to market is a killer.
Okay.
That's something that you take into account.
Okay, you've made that good point. Mark, from your perspective, based where you are.
I mean, based where I am, it's very well known the UAE doesn't have any corporate tax at the moment in time, doesn't have any income tax at the same time. It's also, for those who don't know as well, a facilitation-based economic environment where the Dubai government, the UAE government at the federal level, and the GCC government full stop, will do everything possible to assist the individuals to allow them to thrive and succeed in their particular businesses. And that means that you will have backing support, incentives, benefits, details. It does not mean, however, that it's an easy ride. And I'm not saying that it's going to be as difficult as Israel, and as my esteemed colleagues allude to, it's not the easiest jurisdiction in the world to do business. However, with the correct advice, getting round and making sure you're compliant with regulations, with details, with your labor laws, with your incentives, your alcohol licensing, it is somewhere where it is very feasible to succeed, and to succeed in a very quick place, and also to ensure that your profits remain here in a tax-free environment, which again is a major benefit for a number of players who are quite clearly out in the region.
Okay, I'm very sorry that we're getting to my last question, because time, as always on these occasions, is against us. But Mark, while you're there, one of our distinguished audience has asked, how easy is it for Emiratis to travel to Israel? Do they need a special visa? Are these visas easily obtainable?
So the answer to that is very simple. I was ready to board with 9 of my best Emirati friends in February to come across, immediate granting of visa for the Emiratis. And then, of course, the skies closed down and we've had to delay our particular visit. So as soon as it opens back up again, even for me as a British national, I still have trouble visiting Israel at this moment in time. Of course, we know things are changing. Thereafter, I expect that my trips for Emiratis will commence in June in a very easy fashion. So yes, very easy. And really this is due to the esteemed efforts of the UAE government, the Israeli government, the Trump administration, who facilitated the accords that allowed the bilateral visa exchange program, which now exists. And so I do expect, and thankfully to my other panelists over here as well, their hotels to increase their occupancy significantly, because that's where we're going to be staying when we come. So get our rooms ready, please, gents.
Okay, there's an enormous amount we could continue this, I'm sure, for hours, but our audience has less patience than maybe I do. So gentlemen, what single action, one action, less than a sentence, what single action would make cross-border hotel investment between the UAE and Israel most likely to succeed more quickly? So one thing that will help everything happen more quickly as far as cross-border hotel investment. I'm going to go very briefly through with each of you. So a very short answer. David Fatal, please kick us off.
There's no shortcuts. I don't believe in shortcuts, but if somebody create a fund for this special purpose, it might be faster.
Okay.
But we'll have to do the whole way, you know.
Fair enough. Ariel, what one thing to you would be important?
Yeah, difficult to say. I think the matter of financing and facilitation, whether that, and also that equity and loan is followed. In other words, that the same is provided from the same sources.
So we've got a fund and we've got financing. Mark, what would be the one thing that will help things happen more quickly?
Feet on ground, principal to principal, eye to eye meetings. This is the key starting point for the success of the enterprise between both countries.
Okay, boots on the ground. Henry?
I would say it's due diligence and getting together with the right partner.
Wonderful. And finally, Jonathan.
So following up on what Mark and Henry just said, it's the educational process. So investing into a hotel in Israel, you need to understand what happens in terms of Sabbath observance, in terms of kosher food laws, what's available in hotels and what's not, what the local regulations and restrictions are around Sabbath, around holidays, around operations related to that. That goes back to the due diligence and to the feet on the ground and to principle to principle, really understand what's happening. So your underwriting, syncs up with reality.
Wonderful. What a very long sentence, but glad you were able to do it in one breath. Gentlemen, I'd like the audience to show their appreciation of you five for having joined me this afternoon. I'm most grateful to your comments and to your contribution. We've thoroughly enjoyed scratching the surface of this topic, and I hope that we will have the opportunity to do so on many more occasions in the future. And for now, ladies and gentlemen, apologies for being a little late, but I'd like to welcome and introduce Amir Halevi, the Director General of the Israel Minister of Tourism. And Amir, with apologies for giving you only a little bit of time, but thanks very much for joining us. It's a pleasure to see you as always.
Thank you, Russell. It was my pleasure to listen here to all of our friends, to Mark and to Henry and David Fatal and Henry Taeg. I think that first of all, I would like to thank Lorraine and Russell, Lorraine from the Ministry of Tourism and Russell for wonderful organizing of an impressive and interesting event. I saw from the number of the participants and the many questions that we are in the right way, and we feel that we have a huge opportunity here, and this is the excellent example for the normalization led by the Abraham Accords. I think that what's very important is that, as we saw today, there is a strong interest for investment in the hotel industry between the UAE and Israel. And I think that both of us and all of us understand that it's a long process. As Mark said, I think that first of all, we have to meet and to see eye to eye. But we understand that it's not something for tomorrow, but we already started, and I'm sure that we'll find the right way for wonderful momentum. I think that I heard David Fatal about the long process. So I remember that I think that a couple of years ago, I met one of the mayors from one of the countries that we have border with her, and understand that it takes 1 year to build hotel. So as you understood from David Fatal, in Israel, it's more. It can take 4 years, it can take even 15 years. I have to be very honest. But I can tell you that we in the ministry will go with you, will be with you, will take you step by step. I think that Henry Taeg discussed the incentives that we have for the industry, not included the Tel Aviv and Herzliya, about 20% grant with all the rules that we have around it. So I think that you understand that in Israel, we are the startup nation. Right now, we're also the vaccination nation. But the rules in Israel with the green organization, and sometimes you will find the archaeological sites under the hotel, so it can take time. But at the bottom line, I think that till the COVID-19, the business were wonderful. We already doubled the number of tourists to Israel in a couple of years. And I'm sure that we will continue to do it. After the COVID-19 crisis, we got a huge number of requests from entrepreneurs for the construction or conversion of for facilities for tourism users. It's a strong sign that we are in the right way. And after we changed all the marketing strategy of Israel, that Israel is not only the Holy Land, it's the Holy Land plus the place to make vacation with wonderful beaches, perfect weather, culinary, a lot of sports event, and all we have in Israel, technology, agriculture, a lot of festivals. And that's why we succeed to double the number of the tourists. And that's why we saw that even at the last year that was very complicated for all of us, people keep going and continue to build. And that's why we are very optimistic and happy. As you know, we are open, Israel is open for investment and is suitable for any hotel project. That's why we have a lot of new high-end luxury hotel project for the next few years. We are waiting, they are going to open it like the Six Senses in the Negev, in Shacharut, David Kempinski in Tel Aviv, Intercontinental in Jerusalem, boutique hotel that is going to be very famous in the Golan Heights, and many others. And that's why I think that the ministry with Lorin, that is that doing a very good job, is working with you, will take you with all the process, with the research for a property in Israel, or research for a local Israeli partner. So we can be with you. We have all the information. And also, again, with all of the grants and the incentives that we have, the 20% grant and all the details about the mixed use, that this is under the rules. And as you know, in Israel, the planning and the building law is, at the last couple of years, is very, we change it to promote and to push the tourism industry. And that's why I hope and I think that we can keep going with it. I want also to, as we mentioned earlier, and I think that our minister, Orit Farkas-Hakohen, discussed about the vaccination, a project that we had in Israel that give us we feel that soon we will be open for vaccinated tourism. And as you know, in Israel, most of the projects are open. And if you will come to Tel Aviv and Jerusalem, normal life, and hopefully we can keep it. And soon we will find the opportunity to meet with you here or in the UAE. I just want to focus about the Negev and the Galil. After the big success that we had with the campaign of 2 cities, 1 break, Tel Aviv and Jerusalem, we are building now the Negev as the next product with the alternative vacation for the European, with a desert, with a lot of bicycle opportunities, yoga festival, desert marathon, a lot of events. And the Dead Sea, the craters, and we feel that this is going to be a big opportunity for the European over the winter. They have the Alps and we have the Negev, and we are going to promote it. And that's why we will have Shacharut, Six Senses project, and many other projects, Israeli project, and very big success. And the next product is going to be the Galil, with the Sea of Galilee, with a lot of places, holy places around the Sea of Galilee and all over the Galil. And we will continue to develop, and we have a lot to offer for investors and tourists from the UAE. So let's hope for good news soon. And together, I think that we can continue to develop, break the records in the number of the tourists like we had before. And I'm sure that after the peace that we have, we will continue to do it together. So thank you very much and good luck to all of us.
Thank you, Amir. As we reach to an end, I would like to express our thanks first to our dear friend Russell Kett for our ongoing collaboration, to Ronit Copeland, to Fleur, Hassan, Nahum, and their respective teams. It was an amazing privilege to work with you on this event. And we look forward to meeting you again online or in person. Good afternoon.